Get in! Get in. So hello and welcome back to the walkthrough and setup guide. Today we're going to be looking at the Daytona road course and we're going to be driving the Dallara IR-12 Honda. This has been a fantastic setup. Certainly learnt a few things myself during this setup and hopefully I can put those forward and give you a better understanding of what goes on during tuning setup. So I wanted to try and structure this slightly different, and I'm going to run, if you've seen the lap at the start, I'm going to run the tuning setup. I'm going to run a default setup just to give you an idea of how I'll go with the loose setup, and the only thing I'm going to change on this loose setup is the steering ratio. Which I think I've got set at 6.5, and I just want you to see I've got my fastest lap loaded up. So we save that to loose setup. So I've got my fastest lap set up, 1:27.9. And I'm just going to show you what the difference is running a default setup. Obviously I'm going to deploy KERS in exactly the same place as I have on the previous lap. And just to show you what a difference setting a car up really does make to how the car performs. Doesn't matter about that. So push the KERS. It's just to give you an understanding of the difference in what a setup really does make. 172 miles an hour across the line. He's absolutely miles away from us. If I just click to this view, you can see at the top left corner just how much he's pulling away from us on the straights. Nearly pulled a second and a half out of us just on this corner itself, nearly 2 seconds even. We crossed the line with a 1:33. So 1:33, she's nearly like 5 seconds off. I just wanted to show you that, just the difference in speed setting a car up really does make a difference. So let's just take a little look at the setup, and I'll talk through some of the reasons behind what I chose to change, and I'll also show a few examples at the end as to the difference it really does make. So the tyre pressures was a huge thing really. This took a long time really to work out what the specific tyre pressure should be. Obviously for the front I've tried to go a little bit stiffer to give me more turning response, especially on the turning phase to each corner. On the rears I'm trying to get the best traction I can as well as the highest top speed available. And the reason I've gone for such a high pressure in both front and rear tyres is to get get a better speed down the straights. And I'll just show you the difference that changing these makes just over a course of a lap. So I'll go through the full tune first, and we'll come back to a few small sections just to show you the real difference that they make. Brake pressure, I did have this down at 90 because that's sort of the usual area that I would go for, but just sort of increasing a little bit more made the braking a little bit better, obviously, but you really need to balance how much pressure you're applying to the pedal so you're not locking out the wheels. Brake balance, I just seem to be locking. I'll show you an early replay as well as to how much the wheels seem to lock, especially the front wheels, if you keep to the standard setup. Yeah, so if you go with the default setup, it runs this at 54. So I've only moved it just a little bit more towards the rear, just to try and stop locking out through the front brakes themselves. Obviously we've closed down the brake ducts, and I'm just running these to a point where through the heavy braking phases I might get a temperature up to 1000, but whilst we're driving, the temperatures, there's not too many hard braking sections, so getting this to a point where the brakes are cooling enough between the corners, this was a perfect area to go at. Obviously you can see the downforce, there isn't any. Through the setup that I've got, I've tried to run as much mechanical grip as I can so that I can really just get rid of all the downforce altogether. So when you're looking at setting up the downforce, if you look at this track itself, and let's just come out to the circuit. So if we take a look at the circuit itself, you can see that we've got, from the start, we've got a long, still a bit of a straight, comes into a left-hander, and then almost a long straight again, to a quick right-hander, and then a long straight again, quick right-hander again, little section of a straight, and then we've got a huge section of just power, all the way down to this little kink, quickly through there in fourth gear, and then a huge section again of power, all the way down. So to think we only really need good downforce through turns 1, I wouldn't really call these any turns to be fair, turn 2, a little kink again, turn 3 and turn 4, maybe a bit turn 5 if you want to call that a double apex. And then all this requires very little downforce. Again through here, a small amount of downforce because we're flying through in fourth gear. And then again, literally no downforce. So gradually as you go through the tuning setup, you start to think to yourself, do we actually need any downforce? And it was quite evident once I'd got through the setup that you really didn't need any downforce at all. So moving on to the next section of the setup. This slightly gives a little bit more turning response. If you add a little bit of caster, it adds a little bit of weight to the wheel as well. But on turning, you're just going to get a little bit more, I suppose it's like adding a tiny bit more camber, but it only applies during turning the car. Camber angle, just increase this a little bit more at the front, 2 clicks at the front, just to get, it was on 3.2, just moved it to 3.4. The ride height is very specific, just lifting it by 2 clicks, and it makes such a difference on the back straights. Setting the ride height is very specific, and I'll show you that in a clip later. Spring rate, initially I went with fully all the way hard. If I remember where we were, 422. You see I've come down quite a bit, just to get some grip at the front. Still wanted a relatively stiff spring for this circuit, but through running it at its maximum, the turning was great, but it just seemed to lack the grip at the front end of the car. Camber angle, obviously we're just trying to get as much acceleration out of the corners, through all the corners, so just applying as much camber at the rear as possible. I did try this lower down to try and get better acceleration, but I just found you couldn't get the power down quick enough out of the corners. Again, the ride height at the rear. If you notice, I've had to raise the ride height of both the front and the rear, and that's just due to bottoming out. Once you're at such high speeds, the pressure on the car, even though we've got no aero on, the pressure still just bottoms the car out through the long left-handers really. Stiffening the spring at the rear, I went all the way maximum, and then just coming a few clicks down, just trying to get more and more grip at the rear. You could lower this down, the spring rate, and get a softer spring, but it still doesn't seem to help any more than the area I've got it particularly. Looking at the steering ratio, obviously I'm using the McLaren wheel. I don't want to be crossing my hands and feeding the wheel. I just want lock to lock, and full lock is there anyway, so I don't want to be crossing my hands any more than that. I certainly don't want to take my hands off the wheel to feed it. Again, the toe angle, just left that the same. The anti-roll bar was far too stiff. If you notice through some of the turns in an earlier replay that I'll show, the amount that the front wheel was lifting off the ground through corners, which is still evident in the replay. There's just, obviously, once the one front wheel is off the ground, that front wheel is then not applying any traction. So you're relying on the traction of one wheel, the braking of one wheel if you're turning. So trying to get this as low as I could really before it was giving a negative effect. Third spring, just left that where it was. I'm not really too clued up on the third spring, to be fair. I know it only is used for the vertical axis of the suspension, but I can't see how altering it in this circuit would make much difference. But I could be wrong there. Adjusting this might help the tune, I've got no idea. Staying with 4 at the rear, it seemed fine through acceleration, and staying with the rear nice and soft. Moving to the dampers, I left the front damper exactly where it was. Didn't seem to have any benefit altering this, but you notice that the bump stop at the rear, I've raised this by 15mm, and that's purely because of softening the front springs then caused the car to bottom out through some of the hard right-handers, the fast sections of the circuit. So raising the bump stops so that I get the benefit of the softer suspension, but the car doesn't depress any further than 25, so it stops it bottoming out once the aerodynamic forces are starting to go in the car through the faster sections. It would stop the car bottoming out and losing potential speed. Slightly softened the slow rebound, just to give more traction. I think it's only one click. 2 clicks down, a really minor adjustment, and then I've gone for fully stiff on the fast rebump, and then left the transition just where it was. And that's just so that the fast bump is pretty stiff whenever you're going over bumps, that it's really a solid suspension. Again, obviously the boost pressure we left at maximum, emptied out all the fuel, air restrictions as it should be, just no restrictions. The radiator, setting it to 30 would just allow 1 outlap and 1 flying lap before we started to see any damage on the engine. I want as much braking in the stopping areas as possible, so I just dropped that 1. And this is where this is the whole key really to this lap. the whole key to setting this car up is all in the gear ratios to get as much speed as we can. Obviously you noticed on the default setup we passed the start finish line doing 172 miles an hour. Well, with the gear ratio set as it is and the aerodynamic changes, we're passing the start finish rate doing 194 miles an hour, so 23 miles an hour faster. So the final drive I went with 4417, and you'll be able to look at these, but just I've increased the first gear so it's got a really long gear ratio so that you can accelerate in first gear without too much wheel spin. The same goes for second gear, just really making them a little bit longer than they need to be just so that it reduces the amount of wheel spin. Quickly through third gear, quickly through fourth gear, and then a slightly longer fifth gear as we've dropped all the aerodynamics and we can get maximum speed. And again, just to the point where the car's at its absolute maximum potential down the straights as we cross the start finish line and carry as much speed as we can into turn one. Moving to the differential, left the preload exactly where it was. I tried this at 100 and I tried it at 0, just to, obviously it affects turning the car when you're off throttle, and this was only really evident through one corner, so I just put it back to where it was. Left it at 8 clutches. I did try it on 6 to try and reduce the amount of forces through the clutch through acceleration, but it just seemed to have such a negative effect on the coast ramp. Slowing the car down wasn't as positive. Again, obviously the power ramp as standard set at 65, which you could see through the default setup. I really struggled to get the power down out of a few corners because it's so twitchy. So increasing this angle just allows almost like adding a little bit of traction control to the rear. So if you're really struggling to get the power down and you're getting lots of oversteer on corner exit, just try increasing the power ramp. Very rarely I'd take it to 90 degrees, but 80 seems to really settle the car down. The coast ramp, this was at 45, so I've just brought this down. I'm not sure if this game works as it should do really, because by lowering the coast ramp I've found this time and time again that it starts to under-rotate the car, which is really what I wanted. At 45 I just found through the braking zones the car was over-rotating, which was caused the car to oversteer quite a lot on corner entry. And that's the tune, guys. I'll look at a few key aspects of the tune later in the video, just to show you what a detrimental effect altering a few things does make. So first we'll take a little drive out on the lap. So let's take a drive around the lap. I have got the wheel on for this. I usually would get rid of the hands and the wheel off the screen because it's very off-putting. But I've just had it in so I can take some of the capture footage. So let's go in and take a drive around the circuit. So I'll drive the circuit and then we'll do a full-on flying lap straight from the lap so you can see just how it handles. I'll go down to minimal view. We can still see the curves here. This is all the information we need really. So as we approach the turn one, we're going to be right out on the wall, and as we come in, we're going to be banging our first curves just here. Just before we start braking, we're going to boost the curves, which I usually do on my Y button, because it's very important where we boost the curves during this lap. We only want to be using the curves when we're accelerating, and I know you're going to say, well, you're going to be braking here, G, but it's very important as to where the curves run out, as to where we can reapply power. So we're going to be hugging right out on this far side, coming down to second gear for this corner, and you're almost going to trying to get a really late apex and cut the grass here, coming wide and powering all the way up to fifth gear. Just as you see the first lot of cones, you're going to start to brake as wide as we can coming in. all the way on the brake, right to the apex, dropping down to first gear. Really try and hug the apex and get the power down early, but not spinning out too much. We're still going to have curves here, so we can be applying curves all the way up to about here where we change back into fifth gear, and then we're going to need another application of curves. So we're applying curves all the way, and that's why the gear ratio is so important. We're going to be absolutely maxing out in fifth gear at this point here where we're going to start braking again. So braking all the way down to first gear, where we're going to be trying to hug this curb as much as we can and then get the car straightened up to get back on the power. And we've still got our curves at this point, all the way up to fourth gear, and then braking around the middle of the cones to get into second gear, turning in nice. It doesn't matter if you cut this curb just a tiny bit, but we're almost going to be following this curb all the way out up to third gear. So it takes a really wide line coming into this turn, and then we're going to run out of curves about here, which is perfect for the whole straight on full curves. So another pop of the curves button, which is going to see us up to maximum speed. Just really relax with the wheel and just let the car take its line. Just as we hit the 50 board here, we're going to drop it down to fifth gear and take a really relaxed line as much as we can, taking as much curve as we can on every curb. So let's go for a full lap, and this is the first place that we bang the curves button, the first white line. So there we go, 28.219. It's close to my personal best, and I certainly think I could probably better the 27.984 with the same setup. So yeah, I'll just show you a few points on the tuning and why they make such a difference. So if we come into the tuning, and we're just going to lower the tyre pressures. We'll say this is a different one. So if you come down to something like we might use to get good grip, perfectly acceptable tyre pressures. Say these to a new one. And let's just see the difference. This is where the problem is with running softer tyres. See how he's just able to eke out a lead. See, it's a really tiny change, but it just makes, well, it made half a second difference over the start finish line. Another thing we'll look at, if you put these up to somewhere about where they were. So 22.48 in the front, and 20.89 on the rear. Yeah, let's have a look at ride height, because we can still lower the car quite a distance. So let's just drop it down to about 20 mil. And let's run, say, 40 at the rear. Still go much lower. I mean, just look at the speed he pulls out there, because the car's just bottoming out. It's fine through the intersection. But look at that, we've lost nearly a full second. I definitely think it'll be over a second by the time we reach the start-finish line. The balance felt brilliant, just bottoming out. So let's look if we can lift this front end. Set the bump stops a little bit higher. So again, look at the lead we've had. So anyone would be thinking, "God, you're miles ahead." But the down foot, it's just hitting the floor too much. It's brilliant through the turns. But again, it's a long way ahead. You lose so much time down the backstring of straights because the car's just hitting the floor. See if we can lift those bump stops a little bit further. Just really need to stop the bottoming out. Oh, I don't believe I've absolutely obliterated that time just whilst we're doing this game. Oh, unbelievable! Oh, I love it. And that's what tuning, that just makes such a difference. And you don't find these things out unless you try them. That's fantastic, by nearly a half a second just through making those two changes. So who knows how much more times there. Certainly threw a spanner in the works finding that out just during this video. That's fantastic. So I'll leave you on that high note, guys. Try and put this all together in a nice little video, and hopefully you join me again. Try and learn a little bit more about tuning and just where to find potential in a tune, how to go about setting up your own car. And remember, don't just rely on picking up tunes and setups from online. It's all about your own personal driving style, and it's how you learn about what affects each of these little peripherals or settings, whatever you want to call them. Each of these little things make such a difference to how the car performs, and just by learning a little bit about them, just like that, you can make records. So thanks for watching, guys, and until next time, ciao for now.